Hi, I'm Carl Randolph, producing artistic director for Transformation Theater, and I'm thrilled that you're here to join us for this discussion on BIPOC actors in the theater. A few things before we get started. I'm happy to announce our next virtual reading of The Dragonflies by Kayla Hambeck. This will be available only on Zoom webinar on Tuesday, November 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So make sure you follow our link coming soon on our website and Facebook. For the sake of time, we will not be taking questions during the conversation, as questions were requested at the time of registration. You may, however, post comments in the chat section. Giving Tuesday is coming up on December 1st, and we ask that if it's at all possible, please make a donation either on our website at www.transformationtheater.org or on our Facebook page. And now, I'm excited to introduce our moderator. He's the Associate Artistic Director of the Chesapeake Shakespeare Company in Baltimore, as well as a freelance actor and director throughout the region. Introducing Gerard Alex Taylor.
Hi. Thank you, Carl. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you, Transformation Theater, for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists for this evening. Sanjana Tasker, an actress and activist.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
Sweet. We've got DC-based actor and Helen Hayes Award winner, Frank Britton. Awesome. We've got DC-based actress, director, choreographer, and Actors Equity liaison member, Kara Tamika Watkins.
Hello, everyone.
We have Pittsburgh-based actor, director, and co-founder and executive artistic director of Latido Productions, Don Michael Mendoza.
Hey, everybody.
And with credits including Mimi in the original West End and Broadway productions of Rent, award-winning actress and musician, Kristen Cummings.
Hi, everyone.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. As I just went through, a little blip of everyone's experience, we've got a wide range of experiences on this panel, and I think we'll be able to offer a wide range of insight. I'm just curious, just to start off the conversation, we've seen America and in a lot of respects, the world kind of transform in dealing with anti-racism, BIPOC issues, and just how to have these conversations in theaters across the earth. I'm wondering, in your own personal experiences, what have been some of the successes that you've seen in engaging with BIPOC artists and having conversations of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access among the BIPOC community? What successes have you personally seen recently?
Who's gonna? I might speak up first, if I may. I've split my time between the UK and the United States in doing theater and music, and one great effort that has been Herculean in its cause, that's happened at least in the UK, is that we now have the Black British Theatre Awards, because which is, it's saying that it's Black, but we are talking BIPOC people, as far as everyone of color, people who are not white. Because of the lack of inclusion often in what some may consider part of the elitist part of theater, as far as award ceremonies are concerned, is that the community decided to get together itself and celebrate their artists on every level. Often it's only reserved, awards are only reserved for the highest level, the West End or Broadway. This really goes deep within the community to keep it moving forward all of the time, from local community theater and amateur dramatics all the way up into the West End. So that has been a true positive, and it's only in its second year, but that's an exciting part of something that is happening.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, cool.
To build off of that, I would say, as somebody who is producing all the time now, from starting off as an actor, I would say the one thing that I'm seeing, especially in the last 6 months, because of not just the pandemic, but also the kind of racial upheaval that's happening in America at the moment, is that theater and theater companies are now being held accountable in terms of the phrase, put your money where your mouth is. Because we had everything that happened this summer and still happening now. And we had everybody come out of the woodwork and say, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. But then it was which ones were the ones who actually then took the next step to fulfill what it was that made them feel that Black Lives Matter, And so just speaking from personal example, obviously it's not a competition. It's, whatever your company or your group can do for at all levels, like Kristen was talking about, from community all the way up to professional. But, speaking for us, we donated all of our summer earnings to the Black Lives Matter movement, and, to take it one step further, to say, not only are we saying it, but we're doing it, and continuing that in whatever ways we can. And obviously, any effort is helpful. But yeah, I would say that's kind of part of the experience that I'm seeing as well in terms of steps forward, is that some positive growth out of that is that companies are really, and even individual artists are coming to terms with what that phrase means to them and how they process BIPOC people, not only in their productions, but also in their lives, in their own artistry, and things like that. So, yeah.
Building off of that, I think something that I've seen recently on social media is We See You White American Theater, which is an Instagram account talking about different, very prolific companies in the United States, all across the United States, that basically just write letters and basically just exposing these companies that might do these things, and with a black background and some white lettering saying Black Lives Matter, and holding them really accountable on a public basis. What we do is very, very, it's very forgiving in the sense that it makes us feel good when we in our activism. And I think something like that that Instagram account specifically is very accessible, because it just displays it all out there in a way that just doesn't mince words. And I think it's a long time coming, along with everything that's going on, again, mentioned with the pandemic. And I think it's really important to have accountability like that isn't just a publicity stunt. I think it's gone beyond those things. It's gone beyond, inviting people of color, and specifically Black people, to be your diversity hire and then never talk about it again. I think we're reaching that point where we're going past, the appearances, and we're actually trying to get work done. Ironically, in this pandemic, when we don't have the work that we are usually doing.
So, I want to piggyback off of that, Sanjana, because I think, in the, 10 years that I've been working professionally, I do see these trends kind of come and go. It can become kitschy for a moment to embrace LGBTQ culture. It can become trendy for a moment to embrace Black culture. What are some of the things we can kind of learn from the successes that you all have been describing? What are some of the things we can learn from this moment to keep the momentum going beyond just the pandemic in 2020, where everyone's sitting around with nothing to do, and they want to grab onto this moment? How can we keep the momentum going through 2021 into 2030 into 2050? What are some of the things we've learned from this? Yes, Frank.
That lip service doesn't last long. that's it's very easy to do. It's very easy to say. It's very easy, with the statements and everything, and that's totally fine. But the actions, of course, have to back up the wording, and I think that's what I've been seeing so far. With what's been going on these days, nowadays. One thing I love seeing, with the appointment of Black and BIPOC folks and these high levels of administration in theaters. I've been loving that. So when you see so and so is appointed associate artistic director at a well-known regional theater or any theater, as far as I'm concerned, it's always I'm over here by myself rejoicing. I love it. I love it. So I'm here for all of that and then some. But at the same time, of course, lip service only goes so far. We need to keep up with what we're going to say that we're going to do, and to keep that going. That's one way to keep the momentum up, because I'm really hoping to see those changes once we're back up and running and we're working. Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, oh, go ahead, Karen, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I noticed that there are theaters in the area, the DMV specifically, that are, every couple of weeks, they're like, this is what we're working on. This is what we're doing now. A lot of listening is happening, which is very good. That's one way to keep the momentum going is, you have to sometimes just sit back and listen to actually hear what is going on. So I think that to keep it going, well, we know that Broadway is shut down until next year, this time next year. I'm feeling that might follow suit around the region. So they, I feel that this is the perfect time because everything is taking time. It's not about rushing to do anything. It took a long time to get to where we are. It's going to take a long time to try to fix all of that. So now we have the time, take that time and work on everything that needs to be worked on. Put more people behind the table, put more people on your staff in general, put more people in front of you. Do new works by people of color, about people of color, about transgender people, about the LGBTQA, and add all of that together. Yesterday, there was a statement from a couple of theaters about Indigenous People Day, and some of them said they were getting ready to do works by Indigenous people. And I thought that was just a magical thing to hear. And I hope that they follow through with that. But yeah, those are the successes. And I think those are the ways that we can keep going is just, don't churn it out every day and say, we've got this now. It's take that time to actually put it into action.
Yeah, I like an aspect of what you said is kind of there's an open communication. We're listening as theaters, we're listening and actively responding to the things that we hear. So it's not just listening with no action or action with no listening, but keeping those channels of communication open indefinitely. Kristen, were you going to say something?
I really was just going to, more than anything, reiterate the idea that, at least using theater as an example of, rather than continuously trying to shoehorn us as people of color into and regurgitating old works and doing what is called, what has evolved from colorblind casting to color conscious casting, which is what it should be, that instead of trying to shoehorn us in or ignore the history of the people or show caricature / a very shallow version, it's really about investing in new work with new voices and putting the same weight that we put on reviving Oklahoma, as groundbreaking as the newest version was, but it's still Oklahoma. So there is time and to build from our genuine communities, people's voices, because we are more than just one particular variation of a story that is shown through a very particular white lens. That was my thought.
I also think a unintended success as well in all of these conversations that are coming up is that we, as a community, we no longer have time for the excuse, I couldn't find them, or I couldn't find that story, or that doesn't exist, because they do, we do, and it's there, so look harder. Like it's that, like, now there's a fire under everyone's butt about like finding those stories about BIPOC people, finding the stories about the LGBTQ plus community, and movies that came out like Lingua Franca on Netflix about a trans Filipino woman, finding her life and way, and then not in a, like what Kristen was saying, in a caricature stereotypical kind of way. But I will applaud the effort of theater companies who are like, we're going to change Pajama Game to be different. But it's like you said, it's still Pajama Game, it's still Oklahoma, it's still those stories. It's time to find new, regardless of Oklahoma being a moneymaker. That's fine, but you can make money off of new things. I mean, look at Hamilton. Look at In the Heights. Those are new stories, but they were multi-Tony winning, multi-million-dollar productions, multi-city productions. So I think now the unintended success too is that the excuse of I can't figure it out is no longer acceptable, and I think we've all accepted that as a whole, which is awesome.
It's the old adage of I'm all out of ideas and I've tried nothing, is what it really is. And again, it's also us as people of color unlearning that we have a voice, we have a space, and the opportunity is more than, like, we are as viable as anything else. And going back to what Don Mike was saying, is that you look at, like you said, Hamilton as a musical piece, but then you look at Black Panther, which everyone was like, well, no one's going to go watch that. I think they will. So we are viable and can make you $1 billion. I mean, that is one of the troubles of artisticness and capitalism. Sometimes are not hand in hand, but that's what we're working with. So we got to deal with it.
Going back to the comment that John Mike mentioned of, I can't find these people to do this story. That may actually be a very real problem for some theaters. Maybe we want to do Fences by August Wilson, but we just don't have the people in this area to do it. What do you think are some of the barriers in creating an equitable space of theaters, and how can we kind of overcome some of those barriers to create a space that more diverse people want to be a part of and create more equity in the things that we can do and offer? Sanjana.
I think the first step is to acknowledge that this art form is classist. It is not accessible as we want it to be, as much as film and television is. And taking that first step and acknowledging the fact that, this is something that was originally for white people, and the fact that that isn't true at all anymore. I think taking the steps to reach out to people and to really understand what it means to say that you don't have the talent to pursue a particular project. I think acknowledging the fact that it might be like your whatever guilt or like whatever risk that it might come with the fact that it's not accessible to that audience of people that are older and whiter, and to take that chance. But in reality, it's just like Kristen said, these works that are new, that are reflective of the society that we live in, they don't have any problems making money. It's just the people that are like usually in charge. And thankfully we have a lot of regional theaters that are being led by BIPOC individuals and like these big communities. that's not necessarily the case in, you know, theaters in the Midwest that you're very homogenous in the ways that they portray themselves. So of course they're not going to, they're just, I think it's the first step is getting rid of the assumption is that we don't exist. I've been contacted at least maybe once in my entire career, and they're in the plays that they're doing that feature South Asian characters, or I've been contacted once, but it's like me and my one other friend, and it's like that we're not the only two people that exist in this community, and like in the DMV especially. It's like, oh, are you auditioning for this show? It's like, oh, it's not really right for me, but it's like it's an Indian girl, so I think they just reached out, and it's like it's a double-edged sword, because one, you want to get the job, but on the other end, it's like, I'm not right for this, and there's a whole horde of a community that is not being accessed because we don't know how to approach that situation. A lot of these regional theaters don't know how to canvas, I guess is the word I think the word I'm looking for, but it's just not having the self-awareness that this art form is rooted in a lot of classist, hierarchical, like I think the sooner you acknowledge that, the more work you can do in order to get the people that you want to do more interesting and provocative and diverse works. And I think those theaters are making the moves towards those things, but I think everyone wants to, I've been seeing personally, I think it's just like, we want to do all this work and we're passionate and committed, but we're also not going to acknowledge our problematic artistic directors. So I think it's just, you have to do both. And I think that's the first thing that we need to do in order to get more people of color involved, is to know that those works are being made for them. It's like those opportunities are going to arise if those theaters take that risk, you know.
It like, to answer your question directly, Gerard, that's like a burning topic that I talk about with people all the time, with like, you know, oh, well, we want to do, and this is a terrible example, but we want to do Showboat, but we don't have any Black people. And it's like, well, then don't do Showboat. Like, it's, you know, it's that answer of like, well, we want to do the Mikado, but we don't have enough Asian people, so we're going to do it anyway. Like, that's what's happening. And it's like, and we all saw what happened in Maryland when that happened like 3 years ago. And like, it just, you know, my kind of, what I urge theater companies in any regional place, in any region in the country to do is, you know, we have these regional Tony Award winning companies that are raising literal millions of dollars, and they do a show and they can't find someone for something. And it's like, well, then talk to your fundraising team and raise money for that purpose. You know, like, set aside a budget that is the finding mission to find people who are of Middle Eastern descent to do, you know, a show that's about that culture. You know, it is possible. I think it's that adage, like, anything's possible if you put your mind to it. Like, you know, if you're raising millions of dollars in your budget every year, then allocate part of that to help solve this issue in your season. You know, and also on the flip side of that, what Sanjana was talking about, I get those same calls, like I'm sure we all do on this meeting. And I think it's also taking the time to think, and I think it's changing too now that artistic directors are becoming more BIPOC conscious, and also becoming BIPOC literally. I think it's thinking about the show choice too. I will be very forthright and say that I have not gone in for auditions, and I will say it, maybe I'm hanging myself, but in the Washington, D.C. region, because I'm called in for shows that I do not feel represent me well, because I feel like I'm being put in front of white people as a puppetry situation. Look at Asian people and what they can be, because never, I will say never, in my time in DC, you know, so I will say just specifically in that box, I've never seen a show about Asian people as normal people outside of Miss Saigon, or Pacific, what's it called, South Pacific. But even those are caricatures, you know, like, I've seen a lot of magic, a lot of mystical people that are Asian, but I've never seen like Jenny, who's from Texas, who has typical boy problems and needs to sing about it in this musical, like things like that. So I think that's the flip side of it. It's like, to go back to your question, it's like there just needs to be a little more than, we can't do this show. I think it's, how can we do this show then? Where can we put money to make that happen? Whether it means bringing talent in from out of town.
So this idea of turning down an audition because you feel like it's not representing you well, what are some of the things you might look for in we've got some artistic directors listening to this panel. What are some of the things you look for in a casting notice when you visit a theater's website and look at their mission? What are some of the things you look for in a theater that indicates that you might be well respected, that you will have a space where you feel safe and secure to work on your art? Well, that's a thinker, huh?
Also, is someone listening to Christmas music?
Who's Jingle Bells?
There's an ice cream truck outside. I think that's me. I'm sorry.
To answer your question, Gerard, it's mostly, for me, what I look for in is not only the mission statement, it's quite literally, sometimes I'll look through show photos and see if there's anyone that looks like me. And that's like the most basic thing. It's just like, who do they represent? Like, what does your acting company look like? When I was applying to graduate school, one of the reasons I picked the place that I did is because it had one of the only, it had an Indian man in their company, which is something that I have literally never seen. And something, it's like when I gravitated towards him and I got to talking to him, and he's like immigrated from India to do acting, and being able to speak with him and his experiences in the United States about what it's like to be an Indian person and what kind of roles that he usually gets cast in, it told me so much about the program that I wanted to be a part of, and how telling it is that there aren't a lot of works that represent people that look like me, aside from like Shakespearean sort of works that are sort of like, it doesn't really, those things aren't as concrete. It's like a Shakespearean characters could be anything and be anyone, versus something where it's like very ambiguous. I think I take a look at a lot of shows and who they cast in, like and whether or not they do things where they commit to the idea of the person being the race that they are looking for. Personally, I've been asked a lot to read for parts that aren't my race, whether it's like Latina characters, and it's very, very uncomfortable because it's like, because I look like ethnically ambiguous, I'm being asked to do something, but I'm also taking away from an opportunity from a person that's actually that race and skin color. And so it is this double-edged sword, because again, I keep using the words double-edged sword, but it's like I want the job, but I'm also like, I don't want to pretend that I'm a different race, and thereby taking this opportunity away from someone that is actually that race and is just as fit for this part. So it's like, I look at that, I look at the people that are what they describe themselves as, and sometimes it's just literally saying what and like the history of the company, what they're aside from the mission statement, and just seeing how they would deal with that sort of situation, so I don't have to deal with that as like a young actress trying to make it,
Yeah, and I mean, I also feel like the onus shouldn't be on the actor, right? It shouldn't be my responsibility
Exactly.
to say no to something because I'm not Cuban, even though I've been called in for Cuban roles before, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
The onus should be on the casting director or the
Absolutely.
artistic director or the people behind the counter
Mm-hmm.
to make the smart decision of calling in the right people for the right role.
Exactly.
Because I'm working hand to mouth, right? That's part of being an artist.
Yeah.
In a lot of respects, I shouldn't have to say no to something if I've been offered it, right? You, as the theater, should be making the smarter decision.
Especially when you're like right out of school, you're expected this is mentality of like taking everything that you can, because it's like that's how you make it, that's how you make the connections. But it's like, I don't want to make those connections if I have to do stuff like that. And now you're putting me in this position to have to make those decisions for myself, like you said, putting the onus on me, a 24-year-old something that is doing this because they love it and not because they want to hurt anyone. That's like not, you're now making me make that decision, and it's whack.
You know, I'm being negative now because, you know, I've experienced these things. So now I'm just going to bear it all. You know, what about these theaters that have two or three people of color in their season, and they use the images with those people and just plaster it all over their website, right? These are their showcase images as a way of saying, hey, we are diverse. You know, we value diversity and we value BIPOC. How do we get over the image that the theater puts out as opposed to what they actually stand for? Yes, Frank.
But I think folks are hip to that now.
Yeah.
It's yeah, folks are hip to that now. I'm sorry, I'm a man of few words, you know, when this is my first roundtable, so but yeah, we've seen that for so long. We've seen that for so long, and nowadays, you know, with the tide slowly turning, and I hope it continues to turn, and it needs to continue to turn. If someone sees something like that, you know, it's not, for lack of a better word, it's not excusable anymore.
And
you know,
and it's not to take away from those people's experiences. You know, it's like,
yeah,
that's awesome. Like, I'm really glad that they like got that notoriety and got those roles and could be out there like that. You know, that's awesome. Like, you know, we also have to support each other as people of color to celebrate that as well, obviously.
That's right.
But you know, it's that kind of goes into the land of tokenism. Like, you know, just like, oh, I know one Asian person, so they're going to be every Asian role ever, you know. And I want to like, I've played Chinese more times than I've played my actual ethnicity, you know.
That was me in the beginning of my career. My very first, I've been in the business 18 years now, professionally. My very first show, I played a nearly 60-year-old Japanese immigrant. I was the only one in the cast. No, I didn't yellowface or anything. No.
Kind of, yeah, but
No. It was I learned how to do aging makeup because I had to make myself look older. And I was very slender back then. And my director she's full-blooded Japanese artist, director, brilliant woman who asked me to audition. And at the time I was like, you know, I read the play and I said, all these characters are Japanese. And I went and auditioned, and everyone else in the cast, they were Asian or of Asian descent. And I was the one black actor in the cast. Somehow it worked in this strange way. The only thing I did was I spoke with a slight accent and I worked in the dialects for that. And that was it. And I didn't do a whole lot because most of my acting was just from sitting on a sittable. And so I was acting from the neck up a lot at the time. And then a later show, this was still early in my career, I played a continental Indian. He was Malaysian. And I spoke Malay. And this was 16 years ago. I had a great time with both experiences. And then 14 years ago, I played a character who was of Middle Eastern descent in a play. And I spoke Arabic. And, even with those 3 experiences, and I've done, thankfully, I've done a lot more, before and since then, I said I would never play those roles again because the talent is out there. The talent is out there. So I make a point to, like, if I'm asked to audition or invited to audition for roles that's called for that, I will politely decline. And I have done that. And because most of my roles earlier on in my career were written for white actors. And thankfully, so when I get to do a play that has an all-black cast, or it's a story about Black folks, it's that bonus. I still feel that way. It's like that bonus where it's like, oh, and you get to play a character from your own experience, from the experience and sometimes you may not know. And even if you are Black, but yeah. So I made a point early on, to not do that again.
Kristen, were you going to add something?
One of my questions was actually going to be to Frank to say, well, how many Black people have you gotten to play? Because I feel similar in your early experiences that I was ambiguous, as I feel like, you know what I mean? Enough of people would be like, well, you're going to be Liat in South Pacific. What? I am not that girl at all, but I'm the closest thing that you could find to an Asian girl. So I had to, and then of course I am mixed race, but I am not a Latina, but I have played many Latinas. And then people suddenly thought that I was just Latina. So I was like, oh no, this is what mixed race looks like. There are so many versions of being people of color that I've lost jobs from being, oh, well, you're not really Black enough for that.
I feel that
flips over, but it's not my vision. It's not our vision.
Yeah.
It is through a very much of the white lens of like, well, you just don't seem believable in that part, but I am that thing. So you know what I mean? I think we've all kind of been there.
Yeah.
That you're like,
I've felt like that at times, early on, and to a degree where it's like, am I not Black enough because I am Black? I'm just,
right?
But it's, and Carol Tamika and I've had conversations about this at various times, over time, over the years. I've always wondered that. I've always wondered that, and but I think as I've gotten older, just more, just going along with my career and seeing where it is, and but I haven't played a whole lot of Black characters, but a good small handful. But I want to keep doing it. Want to keep doing more and more.
One of the things that I was going to say is that one of the things, at least as you're saying, as you get older, as we evolve, as we are heard and seen and recognized more and more, is that there are a whole bunch of things. Like very early in my career, there was like a ton of compromises that I was making all the time, but I was a woman of color, I was ambiguous, and I was constantly told that, oh, well, you're just lucky to be here. We already had one of you, and when we get rid of that we're going to replace you with just that. So there's just one person of color, and I'm dancing with the other person of color. Okay, thanks. Get that straight.
Yeah, people didn't know I was Black.
Right, exactly. They were like, can you play the Italian guy?
So I started appearing in more Black, productions that called for Black characters, Black roles.
In that progression, though, there is work you turn down. There is work you don't get because of not necessarily fitting into the box. And again, and a whole lot of compromise, but also knowing which fights to fight. But now, with the consciousness of the entire globe, at least it feels like there is a point where, in the last couple of years of my career, I have genuinely started to ask, well, how many Black people are there? How many Asian people are there? How many Indian people are there? Who do you have? Because if you don't have that, I'm not interested in any of your shenanigans. Now, again, that's as you were saying, is a double-edged sword. Sorry, I want to say your name correctly, and I'm going to mess it up. Sanjana? No.
Sanjana. Very close, very
Sanjana.
close.
It's the emphasis on the front. As
Yes.
Sanjana was saying, it's a double-edged sword in that you get the whole reputation of, oh, she's a bit of a bitch and she's a diva and she's this, she's really difficult, when it is that all I care about is representation and diversity. And if you can't understand it, it's not my problem, it's yours. And not being submissive or apologetic about it. I'm no longer apologetic. If it's a problem, we live in 2020, there's no longer an excuse for it. But again, that is, that's not everybody's way, but there have been moments where I can just, I've been lucky enough to be able to go, well, I don't really need your job, so screw you. And then usually they come back, oh, please. Nope, sorry. And not until you have enough Black people. I'll see you later.
Sorry.
Dinah Washington did that years ago. As a singer, she would show up for a session and she would be like, there's not enough Black musicians here, I gotta go, and just leave the session. So that, in learning my own history and knowing, well, someone did it way before I ever did, it's time to not be silent anymore about it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sanjana.
Yeah. What you said about the white lens of like our like what we look like in the white lens, it's so interesting because it's so true when you're talking about productions of like classical musicals like South Pacific, and when you have like this idea of like the submissive Asian person, and it's like, I don't look like that. So it's like, not only am I not the type of Indian you're looking for,
right.
I can no longer be what you, it's interesting because I can't be the Indian that you want to, but because I'm not the stereotypes that you have attributed to the race that I am. So therefore I'm automatically discounted, when in reality, it's like, the best theater companies in the world like don't play to those racial stereotypes, and they won't do shows like that in 2020 as much. I would hope, but I think it's really, really interesting to bring up the idea of the white lens and how their perception of us colors the idea of what it looks like in the casting room. And I just wanted to mention that.
And to build off of what you're saying, Sanjana, it's like, I'll go back to the picking of shows again. It's like, I got called in, this was like maybe between 2015 and 2018, for several shows at unnamed theater companies that wanted me to have some kind of like mystical thing going on, or I was like a ghost or like a king of some sort or whatever. I had like a magic staff, who knows? And it's that back to the idea of like the white lens of like, my friends were in those shows, they did a wonderful job, but like when I think about the audience perspective, which is mostly older white people that go in and see these shows, that just reinforces and punches through the wall the idea of us as Asians and South Asians being exotic, like that we are this mystical creature of people that we only exist in silk and jungles and floating on top of water. Like that's like not so, which is why you could see theater companies hopefully will make the choices now after this whole era decides to change our industry, of shows like, there's one done by a very good friend in New York that I hope gets traction, and if anyone's a producer on this call that's not me and is listening, think about the show. It's called On the Other Side of the World, and it's about the immigration experience for Asian people. It's specifically about Filipinos, but it's very applicable across the board to anybody from Asia who's coming to this country. And it's set in modern times. It's has zero magic in it. There's like some, flashback sequences, of course, but like, we're not like leaning on Filipino, mythology to tell this story. It's literally a story about immigration. And I know there's many cases like that, especially, with South Asian stories, and it again ties into that idea of like, you can go out and find it and you'll find it. It's there. And in terms of turning down roles, that's why I just did not want, I auditioned, yes, but I think it also ties into being a young actor where, you kind of want to get your jobs where you can get your jobs. But at some point you start to wake up a little and you're like, okay, well, I've put that on my resume just to work at that theater, but now
Yeah.
I have the freedom to make the choice to say no. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that lens that we're talking about, you know, it's not just the lens of the director, but the lens of the production team as a whole, right? Who's doing the lights? Who's doing the costumes? Who's doing the hair and makeup? I see productions all the time of, let's just say, Black women wearing wigs that make them look like white women. And I wonder, well, what's wrong with her natural hair? Who did the hair and makeup on this? Because I have questions. I think expanding the lens, you know, to all of the people behind the table, helps expand the storytelling. Yeah. We have a lot of audience members, you know, fans of theater that are listening to this panel right now. What might we say the audience can do in helping support these missions of BIPOC equitability? Is that a word? In the theater?
Yeah, I get involved. Get involved. Like, you can, you know, beyond just being an audience member who's passive, you can be an active audience member and, you know, volunteer for the theater company. Get to know the people that work at the theater company that you love to patronize, you know, and do that, and really find a way to join their board if that's possible in your life. You know, if you're somebody who can be that kind of a patron, and join a financial fundraising board for a theater company, do it. Like, it's you know, it's, yeah, it seems a little cliquish to be like, oh, I don't know if I can join that group of people, because obviously everyone's usually friends, like they're all friends. But you know, don't be afraid to get involved as an audience member, jumping the gap over to being part of the company itself, whether it be a volunteer, a staff member, a board member, an artistic person, even a producer, you know, things like that. Like, and you know, what your question, when you asked earlier about like when people do research into theater companies. So as somebody who produces, like, if I'm approached by a company that's like, oh, we want to produce something with you, I immediately go and look at their board of directors, and I see like, okay, like, who are these people? Like, because it's the artistic stuff is one thing, but the board is the people who find the money and usually have the money too. And that's important, because sometimes the board will inform the season because of how they would like to spend their money that season. And it can be very influential in that sense. So kind of looking in that direction, like, you know, how is this company being managed? So as an audience member, if you are a person of color, you can absolutely be somebody who says like, you know what, I can do this. I can be on that board, and find a way to get involved in that way. And I would say, especially now, most theater companies, and this sounds like they're going to tokenize you, they're not, but they're looking for that perspective. They're looking for that voice on the other side of the table. You know, they're looking for those folks to step up and help. And I would also say for theater companies, if you're not trying to add people of color to your board, if you are doing a show like South Pacific, then there is a lot of power in hiring a consultant. You know, beyond asking your friend who's Asian to give you free advice, you can say like, hey, Sanjana, you know, you're not Liat, but as a person who is Asian, can we give you a $200 stipend to give us your experience as an Asian American, an Asian person? You know, I think that's also the deeper level, is like encouraging the theaters that you patronize to seek out the consulting that they need on projects. Because that, you know, there's a lot of especially lately. I will mention him, but well, I won't say his name, but he, on a call with a bunch of us, said that he'd turned into like the leader of the Black voices in DC, but like no one was like giving him money for his time and his mind, and just expecting him to donate his knowledge. And I think it sounds really, I know a lot of people get turned off by money, but it's like, this person has degrees, has life experience, has all of this talent, and you just want him to show up there and give you his free time. and you know, to then take his picture and put it all over the place like Jared's. So yeah, as an audience member, encourage your companies that you patronize to do that, but also get involved.
Also, that everything, when there's new pieces done, a lot of the theaters in the area, they put in the little kind of questionnaire thing. Those or never get filled out. People just throw them away. But I think it's very important for everybody to fill them out so that they know exactly how people are feeling about these pieces with BIPOC people, these new pieces that are being done. And maybe more of them will get done when they see that there's a positive response to it. So it's very important to fill those out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and even if you know there's not a formal thing in the program or something, do email the box office and tell them what you thought of the show. Something just popped up on my screen. Don't know what that. Oh, there's a poll in progress.
Speaking of surveys,
Survey says.
What was I saying? Oh yeah, do email the box office and let them know what you thought of the show. Let them know what you thought of the acting and the design and the direction, because negative responses always get through, right? There are always the negative responses of, well, why are we doing this play? Why did you cast that person? That person can't sing. They sucked. Who directed this, right? But I think if you have a positive experience as an audience member, let us know that as well, because the positive feedback will actually help guide us to what's working and what we need to be doing more of. Sweet. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here.
also, I mean, some theater companies even put a little spot. If you're just somebody who donates like $50 or, you know, just like a normal amount of money, doesn't have to be an obscene amount. Like you can, you know, some theater companies give you the option to list what you want to put your money toward. So, you know, if you're somebody who's really purposeful, you can even say in that box, like, oh, I'm giving $50 because I want you to do more programming on, you know, Latinx history, you know, things like that. You know, money talks. You know, there's the one level where you don't give money to a place because they're doing something you don't approve of, but there's also the level of giving money to a specific purpose, because people respond to that too. Like the companies will say, oh, wow, this person wants to give us $1,000 because they want us to produce more BIPOC work. Then great. You know, hopefully they will put that $1,000, but then you get to hold them accountable. You get to say, well, I gave you $1,000 for that. What did you do? So
I was going to say as well, one of the more important things too that is coming through this is the support of the whole system, as far as where delivering people who are making this art. So being able to at least encourage even your local theater with donation and everything that is money orientated, but time and outreach to local schools to allow kids who wouldn't normally get to go to the theater to go to the theater. And when you see your own representation on stage or in a movie, it's mind-blowing and life-changing, and makes you think, oh wait, I mean, not to reiterate the magic aspect, but when you get to see magic on stage of your own face, it means that this is where the future is. This is the legacy part, and that has a lot. I feel it's very tied in together. Is outreach, and sure, it's one thing to be consulted as a person of color. It's another thing to maybe give a little bit of our time, as we do or have done, or encourage others to give up time to make sure that the next generation is going to get educated and have opportunity. That's all.
Mhm. And run folks them checks for that labor.
So we're having this conversation about, you know, BIPOC representation in the theater, in art. I was on a panel once where one of the panelists said, you know, what's a Black play? There's no such thing as a Black play, right? These are all plays. These are all stories. We're all people, you know, telling these stories. Do we think that these labels and these sort of boxes that we sometimes put art into limits the art, limits the storytelling and the people we can reach and the people that can be a part of it?
I don't think it's limiting. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I don't think it's limiting because it's a specific experience, yet it's universal. You know, when you get right down to it, you know, I say Black play, you know, and you know that's and it's not limiting at all. It's an experience that even if you are not Black, you are privy to this experience. You're coming and having this experience, and you may find some universality in it. You know, if you're not Black, and yeah, I don't find that limiting at all because because that's also a mindset. It's an attitude shift. You know that, yeah.
I feel like that phrase or that reaction, it sounds purely reactionary because it's either someone who, I do not know who this person is, I'm just surmising, that wasn't going to benefit from an idea of a Black play, may not be able to take the time or the understanding. It sounds like a reactionary thing to me, in that, at least again, in kind of money and capitalist, it's kind of like, well, there's no such thing. We're just all making art, which is that kind of, maybe you felt uncomfortable watching a piece of Black art, which I think also exists. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, Les Mis, I could use like Les Mis, classic, gone on for years. You can finally now have, that's just because of the limitations that were put on by the aboves of producers. You have Asian, Black, Latino, every walk of life that has been in that show now. But it's still arguing with someone going, well, yeah, but you know, people in revolutionary France didn't sing at each other for 3.5 hours too. So are we suspending our disbelief? Are we really, it's suddenly a judgment of art. It's just trying to, I think, make actual elbow room in the spot so that it's not about, sure, eventually I'd like to be in a place where we're not talking about Black art or Asian art or white art, that we're kind of just talking about pieces of art. But at this time and moment, if we ignore if we ignore how we got here and our own personal paths to get here, then the tension and the uncomfortability and the lack of genuineness is going to be so, we will become not just actors, but liars, if that makes sense. I don't know. That's very strong. I don't know if anyone agrees with me, but it's that weird, it's, you know what I mean? It's a weird balance. I did go off on a tangent, but.
No, yeah. And it's the idea of the universal human experience. You know, you have to remember that too. It's like, yeah, this show may be about the Black experience, but when you watch it, you're going to find.
Uh-oh.
Oh, Dominic, you're
Oh no.
Oh.
And it froze with him, you know, saying something,
making a point.
Pathetic.
I can feel it being so good.
Oh, no.
Dominic, come back.
Right.
Well, hopefully Don Mike will come back to us. Um, I agree with what Kristen says. We're not living in a post-racial society, even though maybe that is the goal. I don't know if it's the goal personally, but maybe someday we can live in a society where we don't recognize race so strongly. But I don't think that time is now.
Mm-mm.
And I think that we have to stand up and celebrate, these stories that kind of will get swept under the rug if we don't,
Yeah, it's all about
But I think-
acknowledging
Go ahead.
and appreciating each other. It's acknowledging and appreciating each other, respecting each other, loving each other, irrespective of where you come from.
Mhm.
Because you see plays with folks of different ethnic backgrounds. It may be centered around a whole family, and I've seen plays like that where I go, my mama is just like that, or yeah, oh, my aunt is, oh yeah, I've seen that, I've experienced that. It's all about acknowledging and appreciating and accepting and respecting one another.
I mean, my only other thought was that I think as well that we have, I think BIPOC people have lived through the experience of the theater of good intentions, which isn't, I think it's an interesting conundrum because it is that very borderline white savior idea of we're telling your story. Come on, get involved. And you're like, this is not my story. I don't want to get involved. But how much are you paying? Oh man, I gotta pay my rent this month. So it's that living through, it's being able to not feel disabled as people of color, as performers, because of what has been placed upon us before. That's why it's the evolution. Again, I bring it back to the idea that we really have to look back and appreciate the evolution that has happened, not cancel, saying, oh, we're not using those words. The vocabulary changes so quickly, but really it helps us be able to anchor in the present of no longer being apologetic to take up the space. That is my mute button.
Don
Sorry,
Mike.
I'm back. I watched everyone's faces go like this, and then it froze, and then I realized I was talking to myself. And I was like, okay, well, there's that. Cool. I didn't even remember what I was talking about because I was so thrown off.
I think we were talking about the Black play and
Oh yeah. So just the universal experience of being human, and I will say, as a young Asian who grew up in the 90s, there was not a lot of Asian representation on TV, and I'm now in a part, thanks to streaming, I'm rewatching all these old shows that I watched as a kid. One of them being Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and I'm learning that I've connected with that show as a kid. It's a Black show, but I connected with all of the universal themes of having a big family, a big family full of people of color that took care of each other. And, my sense of humor came from that show. The things I find funny, the thing, how I make fun of my brother, it's all from that show. And so, yeah, I would say in terms of the term Black.
I saw your post about that.
Right. Yeah. Cause I was watching it today, and Will Smith has 4 aunties in that show, and I have 5, and it's the same dynamic of, they all get together and it's this big party, and it's none of them are my mom, because my mom married my dad, who's their brother. But so I am the Will Smith to those 5 women, where they're just my aunts who all get along. And so, yeah, I would say that the term Black play or Asian play or Latinx play, whatever, I think it's just merely a term of labeling the subject matter, but I don't think it's limiting. And to agree with you, Kristen, it's just somebody who felt that they couldn't feel anything from it. They made an assumption, and didn't open their mind to it, So
I think it's also important to understand that when we incorporate pop culture into our work, we have to acknowledge that Black culture is pop culture, and to remove the words of like, oh well, why do we have to call it a Black play? Isn't it making more complicated than it needs to be? It's like, no, it's just acknowledging the fact that a lot of what makes up at least American society and the way that like young people interact with each other stems from Black culture, and to take the verbiage out of it is to separate it somehow. And I just don't think I don't think you have to do that. I don't think it's causing a wedge. I think it's more just like acknowledging like this is how we function. This is how like relationships between people of color are sort of represented, and it's just, and now it's in a theatrical format. So, and it doesn't always have to be about you, but it doesn't mean it's not for you, you know? So I think it's important to have that distinction, especially just because I think it's giving, I mean, not all of the credit, but it is giving some sort of acknowledgement to the fact that as we move forward in society, we have to acknowledge that a lot of what makes up American society stems from Black culture. And a lot of theatrical works that we do comes from Black culture. And so we need to acknowledge that more, and as we progress in this art form.
Now, just to kind of, beat this dead horse a little bit more, is there a white play that non-white people cannot be a part of? I mean, I went to go see Tennessee Williams wrote a play, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. I went to go see that on Broadway with Terrence Howard and James Earl Jones. And then coming out of it, my grandmother said, that doesn't make any sense because it's about a plantation owner. That's a white play. I don't understand how Black people were in that. And I understand what she's saying. Is there a white culture that kind of pushes out BIPOC people from participating and telling those stories? Sanjana.
I think it's sort of unwritten. I think it's sort of like there's a note on my phone that it's not exactly as explicit as that, because you would assume based off of history that a plantation owner would be of a certain race and that race is white. But there's also like any Jason Romer Brown show that I've ever seen, I'm automatically like, I don't know if I'll audition for this, because it's like, Kathy is always blonde. Kathy looks like this. Kathy looks like Anna Kendrick. A lot of like the falsettos, a lot of shows that are traditionally very like musical theater, like spaces that I have not been a part of growing up. It doesn't feel very comfortable for me to now enter this space and be like, well, and hope for the best, that you will be open-minded to these things. And I think I don't think that white artistic directors and people in charge and producers of these works, I don't think they're actively trying to just disparage those things, but things have been done a certain way. Famous people are famous for certain things. Those things carry forward. They know what sort of look will go with what will make money. And I think it's a very unwritten thing, because there's like shows that are on my white list, quote unquote, that I won't go for because I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste my time. I'd rather work my job that pays me better than to give you my time and hope that you will see it differently. And sometimes, again, we're going back on placing the onus on myself of what I need to do to make my rent as a young person trying to make it. It's like I have to now make that decision, because I don't know if they'll ever see me as like a tiny white ingenue, and it's not up to me, and I don't know where they're coming from on that. And I think white creators can defend themselves and say, well, that's the reason, like, you don't try, then I can't cast you, but it's like, what can I tell you? Like, it's like things have been done in such a which way and for such a long time. And I audition for these roles, and it feels very, I'll go to these casting calls and it'll be all these very like very young, very very nice, most of them. They're like Catholic university students, not to like call them out or whatever, but they're white. All of them are white. And it's like, what am I doing here? I'm really gonna like think of me in this like light? Like I don't look like any of these people. So it's just another thing that you have to consider, like how progressive are we? Like progressive is not an umbrella term. And yet I think it has become this umbrella term that I now have to navigate as a person. And for me, I always have to think the worst case scenario and be like, well, I don't know. And maybe that's just me. That's maybe just me being pessimistic in this. But I don't know. I think it's just important to acknowledge the fact that that exists, like that sort of unwritten sort of idea that certain characters have always. Dear Evan Hansen, they just cast an actor of color in that part, and his mom is still white. He's just an actor of color. Of course, you can have parents of different races, of course, but it's like they took them that long to do that, and it was like made headlines. And I think that it's like the idea that if it's such a big deal still, that I think we need to acknowledge the fact that there's a sort of unwritten rule of like who gets to play what.
I mean, you can also like back. I saw the comment in the chat box about universal themes. You know, you can, for example, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. You can take that story, but tell it in a different culture. Because what I think is Eleanor's her name said, it's about class struggle, and you can do that in a different culture, you know, and not, it doesn't have to be the Tennessee Williams version. You know, it can be the story of that show, but in a different ethnicity. And so it's not a story about white people in wherever it was. You know, maybe it's a story about a Filipino family in the rice plantations of Manila in the early 1900s. You know, which that's true, because you get into colorism. You know, and that's where we can encourage new work to happen. It's like out there, maybe someone on this call who is who is out there who wants to write that Asian American or Asian story of colorism and classism in your country, you know, in your ethnic history, you know, bring that out. You know, with Jason Robert Brown shows, I would say since he's a little more modern, you can kind of bend the rules a little more. Kathy is totally that girl who's like, but there are Asian women who are like Kathy, and there are Jewish Asian people. I know that there's a company, but it's my friend Billy in New York. He was raising money to do a double Asian cast show of the last 5 years, Billy Bustamante. And so I don't know where that stands right now, but
Nice.
you know, it's possible you can do that. So I think with white shows, it's kind of like thinking outside the box. Like, how can you, whether you take the cream of the story and put it in a different culture and not do Cat on the Hot Tin Roof, but do that culture's version of Cat on the Hot Tin Roof, or shows that can be completely flipped over. You know, but it really depends, I would say.
I was only going to say, really, from genuine actual experience of being in London and being a woman of color, and there are no shows. There was no shows in the 90s when I was there, at least starting my career. Maybe I did Jesus Christ Superstar. I was allowed to understudy, and I understudied another person of color who was Filipino. So they were like, oh, well, you just put these two girls together. Great. And then everybody's happy, whatever happens. And I got a call to come for an audition for a brand new piece that was happening at the Dunmore Warehouse. Sam Mendes was the creative director and the director of the piece, Cameron McIntosh. And I was just going in to audition for an ensemble part, really. And I stood outside of the room waiting to go in. Hearing two Americans there, just started chatting to them because I was excited. I was like, oh, hey, how's it all going? What are you doing? This is great. Blah, 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 blah. And I made them laugh. And I went in and sang my song, and I didn't have to do any reading, and they called me back. But they called me back because of the vision of the two gentlemen who were the writers of the piece. I was basically auditioning. They wanted a Marilyn Monroe girl. They wanted that. That's what the big time producer wanted, and that's what was supposed to be happening. And after I left the room, they went in the room and they said, we want her to have that part, so we're going to rewrite it. So it is possible, but it's about, you know, again, it was maybe personally about my own personal tenacity, but I was not afraid to be in that space and to be like, no, I'm right here, I'm fine. And then I learned the part and I came back and I knocked it out of the park. Was good, if not better than any other girl that they saw. And it happened to work out that way. But I have been that woman so many times in my situation of their saying, well, it's not really a part for someone who's a minority, but sure. And I would demand to say, no, I will come and stand outside of your office until you see me. So there is that, but now there's a much more validated reason. Before I had to be an annoying bitch. Now I don't have to be an annoying bitch. I can just say, yeah, I want to be seen. It doesn't matter what, you don't want to see me. You have a problem. It's your problem. So there is that. It's not about that. And this is just personally to you of not apologizing for saying what you mean, because if you don't say what you mean, you can't often get what you want. That's all.
I think it's easier for the more contemporary plays and musicals to do that kind of thing, but I think a lot of the older ones, I don't think I could ever be in Fiddler on the Roof. It's my favorite show on the face of the earth. I love it so much, probably because I can never be in it. But I do think that some things, especially historical things, need to be true to the history of the piece. That's just the way it is. But yeah, with the modern things, I see no reason for. I mean, there as Don Mike was saying, there are Asian Jews, there are Black Jews. Anybody can be Kathy. You know, you can't be a Fiddler on the Roof, but you can be in something modern in the U.S. that takes place here. That's totally doable. You know, yeah, I feel that way about a lot of the newer things, unless there's something very specific. I think Edward Albee put a cease and desist for somebody that tried to cast one character as a BIPOC person, and that was the estate, of Edward Albee, put a cease and desist on it. But if it's not the estate or the specific to what the writer wants for that play, then I see no reason for it.
I think my question is like, how do you make someone like me, and then how do you make those spaces more inviting to people of color? If you want them to participate, how do you get them in the room? I think it's like, how do you make it less homogenous? Because it's like, it's been one of those situations, and maybe it is just a question of tenacity, where it's like, you go in for these things and you see people that like don't look anything like you, and then they get cast, and it's like, it's fine if you don't get the part, that's part of the package deal, but it's like you are constantly met with these ideals. Because I've seen a lot of, I think it's really great that we're moving in the direction of like an Asian Kathy and an Asian Jamie, but I've seen like 10 of the same show that's cast in the exact same way. And so I'm wondering, like, how do you make a space for people that look like me, or people that like Asian Americans who are probably, I don't want to say this like outrightly, but it's like we make up a very, very small percentage of people on Broadway and professional actors. And so if you want those more stories about them, I think it's also a question of how do you make those spaces more accessible and more inviting, and how do you know people are willing to see you in the way? Are you just supposed to be that annoying bitch, but without having to be that way, and also the pressure of being considered a professional, and like all of the things that have to come with that? So I think it's just one of those things that I'm also trying to figure out, and if anyone has an insight as to what that would look like.
I think it's like threefold. I would say first, it's our white allies encouraging people like us to be in the decision room, first of all. Like, then it's the second part is people like us who want to be producers and directors and behind the table stepping up and being that annoying bitch and saying like, I want to be in this room, because that's what I did. You know, I acknowledged that there were no Asian people on the production at the production table outside of designers, and I wanted to help make choices that would provide more opportunity for people, not just Asian people, but people who are of color, BIPOC, et cetera, LGBTQ plus. You know, and then I think once companies can embrace that and provide more opportunity, and people like you and me to really break into those rooms more, now that we, not that we have an excuse to now, but we have the backing of society now to really say what we want, I think that will create that inviting atmosphere that you're talking about. You know, I think as an act from the actor perspective, knowing that I would go onto a project where 3 people on the production team are of color, and maybe one person looks like me who's helping make the decisions for the production, I would feel better. I would say, yeah, okay, great. Like that sounds awesome. And, you know, and have some faith in that show or that opportunity. So from my perspective, I feel like that would be the answer, but there are many.
So we probably have time to ask this last question and then kind of wrap up. But kind of piggybacking off of a little bit of what Don Mike said, you know, we've talked about a lot of issues, for lack of a better word, as we look to the future of engaging BIPOC artistry. How do non-BIPOC people be the best allies as we move forward, you know, in the coming years, in the coming centuries? How do non-BIPOC people become the best allies? Audiences, fellow actors, production managers, and casting directors, artistic directors, et cetera, even students who are graduating and coming into the field. Frank, what do you have to say?
Oh, it's piggybacking off of what Karatamika said early on, listening and being open, being receptive to our stories and to our needs. And I think that's one way, and that has to keep going. That has to keep going. It's I think that's one way. That's one way. If we're going to keep going with that has to happen. That has to happen. You know.
Listen, and also don't be afraid to have uncomfortable conversations, and ask questions. Like, you know, if you have very close friends who are from a community you may be wondering about, you know, ask the question, and they will tell you if that's a question that's out of line, or, you know, things like that. And hopefully you and your friend are on that level that you can be that real. But I would say be curious, listen and be curious and ask questions. You know.
Also acknowledge the fact that just because you have work to do when it comes to speaking to your fellow BIPOC actors and people that you're doing this work with doesn't mean that you're a bad person. But also acknowledge, like, I've had people come up to me and be like, oh, white people are so crazy, right? Like, they say these things and this is your time to shine. It's your moment right now. It's everything's about you. And it's like, girl, you told me that last week. What do you mean you don't have work to do? What do you mean you don't have work to do? But you know what? It's fine. Nobody told her. Nobody told her. And I think it's going back to what Don Mike just said. Have uncomfortable conversations. Don't be afraid that someone might be like, hey, you know what you just said to me? That doesn't make me feel very good. And we're in this together. We're waiting for 5 hours to be seen together. I have your back and you have mine. But I have different things that you should have my back for, if that's possible. And I think it's just, again, listening. That's the key word here.
I think that within the theater confines too, again, is that I go back to education, opportunity, and the invite of, at a young age, allowing theater to be essential. I mean, and this kind of crosses over even with being in a pandemic at the moment, we cannot necessarily defund. If you think that the arts is not important, then stop watching Netflix during the quarantine. You know what I mean? And the only way that any people, any of us ever got turned on, partially was through television or live theater, or being able to go and see a parade. You know what I mean? Anything that was occurring. And that is, it is absolutely essential in the way that we tell our oral traditions and like trade our stories, how we learn how to communicate genuinely with each other in a world where all we're doing is that all the time. My old iPhone. But that we still have this immediate connection to each other, and that it needs to be supported, and that it is viable, and to invest, to genuinely invest really in the advertisement of BIPOC productions, in telling these stories, not just pay the lip service and not just pay the service of like, this is your time, you got 5 minutes. That's what it's, you know what I mean? You got 5 minutes to have your time, and then we're gonna move on to something else because I'm bored. So it's, you know what I mean? It's continuing,
See, and
and how, you know what I mean, is having it keep going. So,
see,
and
now I'm not going.
go ahead.
No, I was. This reminds me, Kristen, of what you said earlier. I'm not going to have anyone telling me to retrain for
Right?
anything.
I don't have time for that. I'm sorry.
Retrain and no. Right.
My thing is
Bump
totally viable. I
that.
worked
I'm
my
not
ass
gonna have
off for it.
mm-mm.
And
That's right. That's
we
right.
don't realize
That's right.
how much, I mean, it really, theater and art really saves lives. Really does.
It does.
And for that to fall off the face of the earth or to be absolutely disregarded is mind-blowing to me, because without art, without theater, without all of the things that connect, without producers and designers, we are not going to evolve any further. We're just going to be people that work at Amazon. You know what I mean? Not that that's a bad thing. I'm saying, though, that we have to have people who do that, but also make the things that are on Prime. Do you know what I mean? So, and I think that's where we got to get to.
I'll just say, I think it's also okay sometimes as a non-BIPOC person to realize that this conversation is not your conversation, or this space is not your space. So it's okay to be quiet, or to not even be here, and let this conversation happen, and then we'll get back to you, you know, once we figured out what we're trying to say. So going back to Kara Tamika's point of listening, reading the room, right? Listening to the atmosphere, because sometimes maybe you're intruding and offering opinions in a conversation that no one asked for your opinion in. No offense, but I think that listening sometimes requires taking a step back and saying, what I have to contribute here actually is not valuable or viable. So I'm gonna take a step back and watch and wait. Waiting can be very important, right? We talk about this in acting, right? The act of listening is actually waiting for the impulse, and then you react, right? And I think that as people, as humans, we can learn to wait a little bit more, as opposed to just, well, this is what I think.
So I hate to interrupt. I'm so sorry, but I have to hop off because I have to go to a production meeting. So I will leave with my last piece of advice. That's just, even if you go into a production team where you are the only person of color, like I often am, know that you are radical in yourself. Like, you being there means something. So if you are the only person of color in a show that may be different, like you're still, your presence alone is a radical moment. because your presence is valued. So you may not feel it sometimes, but you'll be there for that person of color. It's from the actor perspective, you'll be that person of color that someone like you sees from the audience. Or if a young producer is in the audience and looks at the list of people involved on the back end, they'll say, oh, there's another person who's BIPOC on this team. And so yes, you will be in situations where you'll be the only person of color, but know that it does mean something and it's important. So don't let being the only one be something that's a deterrent as well. So, but thank you guys. This was so awesome. I'm so sorry I can't stay longer, but I will watch the rest on YouTube. It was so nice to meet all of you, and I will see you soon.
Thanks, Don Mike.
Please don't make.
Well, I think we are at time, but does anyone have any last words for our audience?
We'll get through this together. The pandemic will be over soon.
Remember, we're all beginners in the beginning.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Slow and steady. Slow and steady.
Mm-hmm. Patience and one day at a time. Mm-hmm.
Thank you all. Thank you to all of our panelists for being a part of this. Thank you to all of our audience for joining in the conversation and giving some great comments, which we were actually able to integrate into the panel. So thank you for being here. Carl, do you have any last things that you want to say?
Hi there. I just wanted to thank you all for the panelists for your excellent words and for the sharing of your very personal stories. It's it's our mission at Transformation Theater to try to raise your voices as much as we possibly can through both the new works that we're producing and as well as these roundtables. So they can't be anywhere near as successful as they are without your kind of participation. And I can't thank you enough. And thank you, Gerard, for your excellent moderating skills. It was a very lively and energetic table, and I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So I would say this wraps the session. And thank you to our audience for attending. And follow us on our Facebook page and on transformationtheater.org. And till next time, everyone stay safe.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all
Bye.
for joining us.